Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello everybody, welcome to this very special bonus episode this week with a colleague, someone I'm working with for the past few years, Charles Oppermann. Hi Charles, welcome to the show.
Hey Vasco, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
And I do appreciate the fact that you ended up buying the microphone I recommended because having worked with Charles now for a while, and of course he knows working with his colleagues at Malwarebytes as well, I have come to appreciate and be grateful for excellent audio quality. Thank you, Charles.
Yes, and it goes both ways, just not only on the microphone, but also on good quality headsets, because when you deal with a bunch of different time zones and a bunch of lag and a bunch of accents, being able to understand is just as important.
Absolutely. Well, so to introduce Charles to the audience, he's a 30-year veteran of the software industry. That's wow. I think you outdo me by about 8 years. So definitely respect there. He prides himself on shipping high-quality software that helps humanity. From the JAWS screen reader, JAWS, and making the internet accessible to people with disabilities while working at Microsoft, and for the past decade, protecting people from online threats at Malwarebytes. And just coincidentally, right now, there's so many examples of how important it is to have that kind of protection. Well, Charles, that was a short intro. So we're actually here to talk about a story of how you guys went from 12, that's 2, to 68, nearly 70 releases a year at Malwarebytes. And this is really a hands-on transformation story for all of you out there. So, Charles, walk us through what happened at Malwarebytes, where you work, and what happened in the past 18 months. Where did you start, and what changed since that got you from 12 to 68 releases a year?
Thanks, Vasco. So I started at Malwarebytes actually probably 6 years ago. I was doing another security company before that, and these were small companies. They had some secret sauce, and they were shipping that software out, and they were doing well. But they didn't. They were learning as they went. And I've been around for a long time. I've been exposed to a lot of different techniques, both big at Microsoft and very small, just 5-person companies. And I realized that at Malwarebytes, we had the gem of a good idea, but we were not executing as far as getting it out the door. Shipping to me is a feature. We all talk about let's get features into the products and let's make sure it has high quality. But to me, shipping is a feature. And one of my philosophies is that everyone up and down the organization has to remember that the next release is not the final release. There will be another one right afterwards. And if you can do that regularly, every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks, whatever cadence you choose, it becomes a lot easier to start to make decisions about what's in, what's out. And what I was seeing beforehand, and I was hired to be the manager for test automation. And I built up a test automation team. And with a change in management at the end of 2019, we had made a decision to go in a different direction, and we reorganized all of our testing organization. And I was put in charge of test engineering, which is responsible for our consumer products, Malwarebytes for Windows, and our core technologies that will go into our enterprise products as well. And as part of that, one of the things I insisted upon was the ability to control the release process as well. It wasn't just enough to say, hey, I'm testing the software. I wanted to make sure that when the software is delivered from development, that it's verified and then sent out. I wanted control of that process. And previously to that, in 2019, we had this notion of doing it every month. Let's get an update every month. And that sounds great on paper. And it's like, oh, here's our April release. Well, when I look back, I realized we had only done 8 releases in 8 production releases in 2019. So we didn't make that goal of every month. And we'd only done 4 beta releases. And most of those were for our next big product. So we were not taking advantage of our pre-release channels, our ability to get software out to customers early. And one of my marching orders when I took the position was to go faster, get more velocity out of the team. And so I put the team on a different footing. I took a concept that had served me well, and I saw at Microsoft known as the ship room. And previously it was known as the war room. And a lot of companies still use the war room. But Microsoft in the 2000s went through a transformation to use more politically correct terminology, and so instead of war room, it's ship room. And then instead of you want to kill the competition, you want to score a touchdown. So ship room is exactly that. This is the place where we discuss shipping the software. And it took the place of the daily stand-up. Really, the daily stand-up was just everyone checking in and saying, oh, hey, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And don't get me wrong, that's an excellent point of collaboration for the team. And it's important for every team member to be able to say what they're doing and for people to ask questions. But unfortunately, what I was noticing was it wasn't moving the product forward. It wasn't saying, okay, well, are we ready to go? Are we ready to ship? And so at Microsoft, one of the things we would do is we had our bug queries, and you would say, okay, here's our top 10 bugs, or here's our 10 bugs that are preventing us from shipping. Who's working on what? Have we got everything assigned? Does everyone know what they're supposed to be doing? And you would just rapid fire go through those items, and if a new bug, and then as new bugs came in, you'd go, okay, here, and it would be a triage of the new items, making sure it's like, okay, we will do this, or okay, we'll do this in the next release, and no, we're not going to do this. And so once you do that, and I got everyone into that cadence, and that's the key point, is getting everyone on, and I'll speak to that in a moment. We shipped every time. And so we went from those 12 releases in 2019 to 68 in 2020. And now I really like that number because it's more than once a week there was a release. And so and I believe it was, it included both beta and production releases because they are external releases. That was, for me, the demarcation between what's internally we do and what's external. And so the key thing that we needed to unlock was in a traditional, when people start doing agile and saying, okay, we're going to do a 2-week sprint. And the developers go, okay, I got 10 working days to get something done. Well, the tester who needs to verify that work, goes, well, hold it. I need to get it before those 10 days are up. And sometimes you see in some organizations where they go, okay, well, developers only get 8 days or 6 days, and it must be delivered to the tester before then. And I don't like those things because it reinforces the notion of things get tossed over the wall to test. And I don't want that. I want my testers working very closely with the developers. I want them to have a developer mindset. I want them to have access to internal builds. I want them to have the developer to say, hey, here's something. I want them involved at every stage. It's not just, at the point that it's being built. So getting that mindset going, getting my test organization thinking along those ways. But even that's still not enough because the developer will still be making changes and doing things right up until the end. And so instead of artificially saying, okay, development must stop and everything must be in 6-8 days, one of the ways we did is developers can go right up to the end. But at the end of the sprint, it must be in shippable form. That's the agile nirvana, be shippable at the end of a sprint. And previously to this process, that was never the case. It would always be, there would always be a period of what we call stabilization, integration thing. We call that integration at Microsoft. Stabilization, I've heard at several other companies.
Which is kind of a shortcut for waterfall, right? You're separating the actual development from making it work, right? That's exactly what we used to do way back when.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I wanted to kind of break down those barriers. Don't get me wrong. I never thought of waterfall as a bad thing. There are places where it's very important to have that kind of structured process. And there are many things from the traditional waterfall process that I think every agile team needs to take advantage of, which is to plan and design and then implement and verification and iterate. And that's the key, is to iterate. And so now we ship at the end of the sprint because the quality of the software at the end of the sprint is of sufficient quality to be able to go into beta. Now, beta's got a much lower bar. We're not advertising this as high quality. We're just saying this is good enough for people who have signed on to take that risk to use it. And what that unlocks is because you ship out, you end the sprint, you ship out to beta, and now the developers can go into their planning for the next sprint, and the program managers and product managers and product owner can go, okay, here's what we're going to do for the next one. And now they're unlocked and they're off to the next one. There is still going to be verification work that's required. There is still going to need to be some deployment tasks involved as well. There's all sorts of little steps that are needed. And so, but by saying to the developers, okay, you're on to the next thing, the verification can continue. All those other little tasks, the regression, both automated and, well, actually not automated, but manual regression, where we go through all the nooks and crannies of the product to make sure that everything has been tested against all the different platforms, that can continue after the sprint. So the testers frequently at the beginning of the next sprint are still working on the previous release deliverable, just doing that regression. Now, it took a while. It absolutely took a while for this to come into place. We had a big cultural shift we had to make, which was to get a bunch of developers and testers who were kind of used to the old way of going every month, into this new, much faster cadence. And so, but I'd say very quickly, within 6 months' time, they kind of got it. And we had some early successes where we showed the value of it. And one of the things that really keyed off of this, and I was able to evangelize within the company and this product group, was something that you had told me, which I think crystallized the philosophy, which was, what's preventing me from shipping today? Those are things. We should always be ready to ship today. And I think you had posed the question like, well, why can't we ship every day? Why can't we have 2-day sprints, or 1 week sprints, things like that? And now that's an outrageous question because the planning overhead for a sprint is high and you wouldn't want to do that. But the question is really valid. Why can't we ship today? And at our company and most security companies and many companies these days, particularly in the mobile space, they're shipping very frequently. Even 2 weeks is not good enough. And so, and I looked around and we go, well, you know what? I ship, data files and sometimes binary files to my millions of customers several times a day already. And how do we do that? One, it's a very controlled process that's with a lot of input checks and a lot of output checks. It's all automated. So tremendous test automation where we test everything against all the different platforms that gives us confidence. That's the important thing. Do you have confidence to ship? And you do the testing automated, and then you go boom. And so now it's not a human process. That there's no one person to screw it up, and and we have some really incredible researchers at Malwarebytes. That's what I think is our secret sauce is these guys understand the threats that people encounter online and very, very quickly can design protections against them, and then we get them out to our customers, and we'll do that dozens of times a day. So I use that model. It's like, hey, we already ship software.
In a certain way, you had, from a cultural shift perspective, you actually had somewhat of an advantage to many of our listeners because you already had inside the company concrete, very practical examples of how you can ship 6, 10, 20 times a day. So I think that one of the key aspects there was, okay, so how do I get this team, the product team, to imagine the possibilities, right? To feel that this is a possibility. And I know that you did a lot of things, and I did want to say that this wasn't like this top-down, all planned in advance change management project. It was something that happened every day, and you were pushing for it every day, and small things came up every day. But so you had that question. Why can't we ship today? You had the test automation and the idea of the staggered releases. So beta goes out immediately at the end of the sprint, and then we do regression, and then that beta becomes the release. What were some of the other concepts you and the team introduced that helped the team get to that cadence? Because 68 releases a year, that's quite a lot anyway.
Yes, and that doesn't include another 20 odd releases for another product that many of this team also shipped that we did with the same processes. Thank you for that. It's one of the things when you mention top down, it's like I abhor top down structure or management structures. I think you hire people for their ideas and their creativity and problem solving, so use that. I do not. My leadership philosophy is I don't hire people to be a remote extension of myself. I don't want to just push buttons and remote control people. I hire them for their creativity and their input. So I really drive initiative down, and I look to the individual contributors to be making creative input into the processes. Now, it's also very collaborative as well. I don't like the idea of that test only cares about bugs and product management only cares about stories and dev only cares about implementation and things like that. And so I wanted to break down some of those stereotypes, if nothing else. And so one of the things is for every decision, any sort of inflection point in the process during the ship room, if we're going to make a choice whether to ship something or not ship something, or to take a story in the middle of the sprint or not, or to punt it out, I gain concurrence with the product management leads and the dev leads. And so we have a few in each area. And so I make sure that they're bought into the decision and that any one person can say no. They can go ahead and say, no, I don't want to do that. And so the three pillars, dev, PM, and test, all have to be in agreement on something. And so that was one of the changes. And previously to that, it was you'd have a traditional environment where the product manager acted in the product owner role, and they would be somewhat authoritarian and say, okay, here's our ship date. We're going to ship on this date, quality be damned. And sometimes the test manager would be empowered to veto that. But I didn't want to be that. I didn't want to be the person saying, no, we can't ship. I wanted us to be very collaborative. And that's all part of the philosophy of shifting left with quality. If you say...
Tell us a little bit more about that, because you were just going to pass over that, but that concept is actually very important. You said shifting left with quality. So walk us through that. What were the things that you and the team put in place to shift quality left?
Thank you. So I dislike the term QA, and that I've just never been a big fan of it. I'm a tester. I'm a test engineer. I'm a software developer in test. And because to me, quality is something the entire organization does. The CEO does, the product managers do, the developers do, everyone does. So shifting left means it's not just the tester's responsibility for quality. In fact, the testers has nothing to do with quality. They're only telling you that it's a quality issue. Everyone else has to design in the quality and implement the quality. And the tester tells you that it's been done or not. And so shifting left ensures that you're pushing the quality initiatives up the chain. And it goes pretty far. So yes, you're going to make sure the developer produces quality work. And how does the developer produce quality work? By having a good specification or a good story that lists out the things that are necessary, that everyone's on the same page. So that requires good planning. And then it goes even further left from that, where the product rewards safe development, quality development, not necessarily risk adverse, but risk managed. Big believer in managing risk. I will absolutely ship out a product that I know has some bugs that will affect some customers, but I'm managing the risk of that. I'm saying, okay, it's acceptable that some users will have this problem, but 2 weeks from now, they won't, because I will have released an update to them.
And that's actually something important, because thanks to the constant releasing cycle you have, what previously would have stopped a release because there was a certain bug that was, for example, visible, is now not such a big issue, because you know that in the case of beta, in less than a week, it will be fixed. In the case of release, at the latest 2 weeks later, if it's important enough, it will be fixed.
Absolutely. And that was one of the ways, I was able to show that. And we had this happen in 2020, where there would be times where the business would say, hey, we have a high priority thing that we need to get out into the product like right now. Everyone needs to stop and work on this. And And that would happen frequently in years past, and everyone would stop, but not everyone's working on that new thing, but everyone would stop because the entire operation stopped. But now with this staggered release and this notion of every 2 weeks, you can do implementation in one sprint and deliver that in beta, even though it may not be user visible, and then you can enable it, turn it on, and do more testing if it's a complex thing in the next sprint. And so you can still get things done, even though it may not be, you could not test it to the extent possible if it was enabled. But we were able to absorb urgent business needs without blowing up the schedule. Only a few times.
That's actually very important, without blowing up the schedule, because the opposite of frequent releases is, of course, infrequent releases. And as you said, when something big comes up, like a new customer opportunity, you need to turn around and serve. That it spoils all the planning that had been done before. And of course, because you have a longer release cycle, the planning is even more important and more fragile. But because you're releasing every 2 weeks, you can turn around to the business, say, absolutely, we'll do that. It will be out in 2 weeks.
And it wasn't enough just to say that. We had to do it. We had to show a consistency of getting it out every 2 weeks. And now everyone's got that confidence. And this all came from my experience at Microsoft. I worked on Windows early in my career. I worked on Windows 95, Windows 98, what became Windows 2000. And these were huge monolithic projects that had, that they'd be planned out as, 2-year projects, and there would be milestones in between and whatnot. And invariably they would become 3, 4-year, 5-year projects. And
we remember that. Windows 95 came out in what year?
95, and that July 24th. I remember the date very well. And or August 24th. Sorry, July something was when we RTM. But the point is that over those kinds of time, the requirements change. And the most classic example of this was what was being planned out as Windows Vista. That had been going on for so long that the entire industry had changed out from underneath. And what they were planning, it's like, no, we can't, A, we can't do it. And B, we have a whole different set of requirements. And the longer you go, the less agile you become. You get more stuck into things, and then you have to just push the plunger, blow everything up, and come up with something new. And so that's what I saw that happen frequently. And it happens on a smaller scale. When you have a 1-month shipping cycle, and that product management comes in the first week and goes, yeah, I know we just spent a few weeks planning this out, but now I've got something new, and it's got to happen, because if it doesn't happen,
boom, this planning is gone.
It's like, oh, I can't ship this in the beginning of April. I'm going to have to wait until the middle of May for it. No, I got to have it now. And so, yeah, and all the planning and all that effort goes, and it's incredibly demoralizing to the team. And so by shifting that to 2 weeks, and again, but it's important to prove it to the team. And we celebrate the small successes. We make sure it's a very collaborative process. One of the examples of going through Ship Room every day, when we see the new bugs, I don't just talk about the bugs. I ask the reporter to talk about the bugs. I want the reporter to say, hey, this is what I found, and this is why I think it's important. And then we can have that discussion. We ask a few questions. Sometimes product management will say, well, what's the impact of this? And of course, we have all the metadata to help us with those decisions. But that gets involvement in the team.
So some people might think that we're talking about team, and some people might think, it's just it's one team. It's like, 7 people? But actually, this is a pretty large team that spans across the globe. So how many people more or less are in that ship room every day? How long does it last? And what do you typically do in that ship room every day?
So thanks, because that is something that has evolved. It is planned out as 1 hour. And it is daily, and it is at 10 a.m. Eastern time. And that the reason for that time is because that is the one time where we can get our folks in Talon and in the East Coast of the United States and in the West Coast of the United States, and pretty much everyone in between. There's about 40 people at any given time in the ship room. And it's a mixture of hardcore developers, of which there may be a dozen, hardcore testers, which we might have 8 on any given day. and product managers, which will have 3 or 4, and then several higher ups as well. And then we get folks from support and other stakeholders who are interested in the progress, who are just like listening in. And we have folks from our research group as well who are come in with, because research in our company is like product management, because they have certain requirements. It's like, hey, this is an emerging threat. We need to get some fix into the product quickly. And they, in fact, research probably blows us up more than product, and we're able to absorb that. And and that's really what's been the key. Now, I want to go back to the staggered releases with beta, because the other key factor is that you're not date driven. The date is the end of the sprint, and you get into beta. At that point, you might have what we plan on is to go into beta at the end of the sprint, and in our case, that's on a Wednesday around noon Eastern time. And so we go into beta there, and our goal is to move that into production the following Wednesday. And of late, we've adjusted that to the following Thursday. So we get Thursday, Friday, the weekend, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So we get about 7 days of beta time, of soak time. And during that time, we're looking at the telemetry. We're going through manual regression. But because the team, the development, and most of the testers have now gone on to the next thing, we're not as bound to making that production release. It's now quality driven. It's not date driven. And we can say, hey, a beta tester found a problem, or hey, we found our regression found a problem, or hey, our telemetry is showing us as having a problem. We don't have to blow everything up. Not everyone has to stop. We can investigate the problem, and we've gone ahead and we've delayed the production release. It's happened once this year, where we delayed the production release 4 days.
And we're into the 6th month of the year for those listening.
Yeah. And actually, we had one case in February where we went into beta. We had some issues. We had some requirement change, and we decided to abandon the release. And like you abandoned the sprint, but we didn't have to abandon the sprint. We just said, okay, we're going to keep what we have in beta, and then we're going to revise the beta at our next sprint. And then we shipped again. So for this year, and I have it on my calendar, I have a nice big 1-year calendar, and I mark off every time I ship. Got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. By the end of May, we had 9. And let's see, at next week, we will we're going to production again this week, and we're going to beta next week. So that's our cycle. The idea is that you go into production 1 week during the middle of a sprint, because you're putting into production what you delivered the previous sprint. And then at the end of the sprint, you go into beta. But decoupling that, the staggering, has been tremendously helpful to team morale, because now it's not a matter of like, oh, we all have to stop what we're doing to get something out, which might be just one developer and one tester doing the work, but it interrupts everything if you do it that way. And we don't. And so now if there's a bug that's found in beta, we can get the developer to say, okay, I can revise that. He revises on a branch. We get a new build for that release. And there's a lot of logistics about, making sure our build processes can go ahead and rebuild something older without impacting our current work, things like that. But we've worked out all those kinks, all those little thorns in the process. And so the developer makes the change, the tester verifies it. We then push it back out to beta. Very easy process. It's push button for us. Now, it wasn't always. And boom, we can verify with the beta tester that it fixes the problem. We then delay a few days to make sure it doesn't cause any other problems, and then we're on our way. Instead of really blowing up everything, we simply just get the people who need to make the fix involved.
So we're getting close to the end here, Charles. And for those listening today, I'm sure some of them would be like, "Oh, all right, so I've been thinking about this for a while. It's now time to get started. I just heard Charles' story, so I'm sure I can get it done as well." So where would you suggest they start? Like if you go back to 2019 when you started this process and you think about, okay, so if I could go back, like where would I start? Can you advise our listeners, where would you start trying to help a product team go from potentially one release a month to, once every week if you count in the beta releases?
Sure. I would say do a lot of listening. one of my corporate training, as it were, my life experience has taught me to be very collaborative in my thinking and to gain consensus. I'm not a very good authoritarian person. If I was, I'd be very upset because I can't control what the product managers do. I can't control what the developers do, but I can be persuasive. And so listen a lot, find out what the current issues are, and ask for patience and say, hey, let's try this. One of the things, and this is, again, something from you, Vasco, is the experimentation mindset. And we as a company are very experimentative as well, and that'd be a great other topic for your listeners. But is to say, hey, we're going to try this way for a few sprints, and let's say we're going to do this for the next 3 sprints or 2 sprints, whatever. And we're going to have a meeting. In fact, put the meeting on the calendar, all when you do it, and we're going to evaluate it and say, how did it go? What did we like about it? What did we not like about it? And then change it, and basically say, we're going to try this. We're not going to commit to it, but let's see if we can't get some successes out of it, and ask for patience, and make sure everyone feels like they're not locked into it. Because when people feel like they're locked into something, they're going to dig in and say, no, why are we changing this? Say that it's an incremental improvement. Say this is where you want to go, and here's our first steps. And then evaluate, use your retros to evaluate and make changes as need be, but always have a vision, ask for patience, ask for collaboration, and be sincere in all of those things. My relationships with the PMs, have evolved over time. You've probably heard in our ship rooms, some arguments, some discussions, and we've gotten better. We've learned to trust each other. That I don't have an agenda, they don't have an agenda, and once there's mutual trust, things happen way easier. And now I think it's a well-oiled machine now. And it took 6 months to get to that point to where things were moving quickly, and I'd say another several months before we really felt good about this. And we're now moving this to other areas of the product with the company with really good success.
Absolutely. Okay, last question. Is there a resource, a book, a podcast, a blog, whatever that you would suggest our listeners dive into to learn more about how to get to this 68 releases a year?
Other than hiring you, no, I don't have a specific one. Someone like yourself, who has the experience in that, and asks the right questions, was incredibly enabling for us as a company. And so I thank you for that. The things for me that, worked for me was this belief in automation, and that we were a very manual process before. Everything was incredibly manual, and that introduced errors. And so, so I did that. I don't have any one thing. I'm a big fan of rapid development, which is a very old book. It's not a book about agile, or not a book about Scrum or anything like that, although it might touch on the topics, but it is a collection of research based on software development and processes and practices that I picked up, I think it was in the late 90s, and I just absorbed it. And every so often I go back to it and go, oh yeah. And mind you, some of it's very old. And then some of my things that I've read in the past was, of course, the Mythical Man Month, about the development of the OS 360, or I can't remember the name of the software, but Fred Brooks, and just great stuff about people management and understanding complexity, and making sure you understand where the complexity is. I think one of the keys for me being successful in this is I have a lot of technical credibility. I've been in the trenches. I know the software at a very hardcore level, but I also have worked at a high level in shipping software, and so having that knowledge up and down has been personally useful to me. But no, unfortunately, I don't, and I'm going to rely on people like you who are way more connected and know much more about the state of the art in this to provide.
Okay, so that's a challenge. Of course, I will take it. I would recommend a book about your old company, Microsoft, and it is an old company these days. The book is called Microsoft Secrets. It was written by Michael Kuzuman and Richard Selby. And the thing that I really like about this book is that it was talking about the sync and stabilize cycle at Microsoft already way back in the 90s. This was before Agile was a thing. And the book was published in 1995. So it was written the years before that. So maybe 94, 95 when it was written. And Microsoft was already implementing what became something that we call these days the daily build or the nightly build. They called it the nightly because it was done at night, of course, back when computers took a long time to compile stuff. And for me, that was kind of, I was already into Agile at that time. And when I read the book, that was kind of a shift. It's like this Microsoft, which is, let's be honest, one of the most waterfall-y companies ever, at least until recently. I mean, they've published their processes, so we can look at them and see how they were waterfall-y. But they were doing, on the technical side, really pioneering stuff like this nightly build. So I would definitely recommend that as one of the books that was inspiring for me at that time, right on the topic of today's podcast.
Give me 30 seconds, because in the rapid development book, there's one section about what they call the mini milestone model. And that most closely represents the way Microsoft was in the 2000s and in the 1900s or 1990s, was you design it, you go into a design phase, or, where the PMs write specs and they work with the developers. You go into an implementation phase, and then you go into a stabilization and integration phase, where you're integrating the work from other teams and you're doing the verification and you're fixing the bugs, and then you do it all over again. And it's mini milestones, and that relatively worked well. And the problem is that if those milestones got too big, that you lost scope control. And we saw that time and time and time again. When Steven Sinofsky came in to run Windows 7 after the debacle that was Vista, he laid out, and in fact, I have it behind me here, a 2-year plan for the next version of Windows, and was incredible scope control and making sure that you met all the minor stuff. And I think they shipped the first beta a month late or 2 months late, and then they came back a month, and they were just a month late after laying it out 2 years prior. And that was very impressive, because that's what he had done with Office. Office always shipped on time.
Which is something that you are right now doing at Malwarebytes, because of the cadence of release, you can always release on time. The only question that is left open is what's ready to release. Exactly. And that's a very important mind shift, right? Because if the system we have in place consistently and predictably delivers release, then product management and the business are much more free to make scope decisions, because they know whatever is ready will come out. So it's really just about prioritizing what to do next.
Exactly. And one of the things we encountered was a developer would create a feature and would get to the end of the sprint, and I have what's known as beta blockers and ship blockers. And something would simply not be ready, not even for beta. And we'd go, okay, now that's a beta blocker and I can't go into beta. And that was, to me, really bad, because now I can't ship my beta at the end of the sprint. And so after a few times where this was coming up, the developers would learn to easily be able to back out a change, to get it onto a branch and have a new build that did not have that feature. And if it was close, then maybe we can get into a beta revision, but more often than not, it would come into the next sprint. And it took a few times for that to happen. So you have to have the infrastructure to not be forced into having to finish something, where you can back it out, release what you've got, and go forward. If you have systems that prevent that, and the only way you can do is move forward, and you got to fix it, you got to finish it, then you're stuck. So you have to make sure that you have the ability to back out something or revert it, or not even include it in the first place if it's not ready. And that was another key learning that we had.
All right. And on that keynote, we will end today's episode. But Charles, before you go, do tell us, where can we find out more about you and the work that you're doing?
So I'm on Twitter at ChuckOp, ChuckOp, Charles Oppermann, and I'm all over the place. I'm ChuckOp everywhere, and that it's not hard to find me. I'm not as prolific as yourself, Bosco, but that's only because I'm really busy.
Absolutely. We'll put the link on the show notes so that people can easily find and connect with Charles. Charles, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for your generosity with your time and your knowledge.
Thank you, and the same to you, because I've learned so much over the last 18 months from you.
We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.